Good morning, comparative government, or good afternoon, whenever you find yourself watching this. Let's get right to it. So we're going to talk about the second part of political institutions. Um, and without further ado, let's get govy, shall we? So the first piece I want to talk about is the difference between a federal system and a unitary system of government. A federal system, as it says here, power is divided between central and regional or subnational governments. We might think about it, this is where it gets confusing in the world of comparative government and politics, is we might think about regional governments as states. States in this class are considered actual countries. So like the state of Oregon is actually a regional or subnational government. And so that means that the United States is a federal system of government because you have the central government in Washington, D.C. And then you also have regional governments, the 50 states that have protections, constitutional protections over what they can and cannot do, right? And so if you think about it, I'm sure everybody can think of some things. What are some things that are legal in Oregon that are not legal in other states, or vice versa? There's a wide variety of things that a federal system allows for virtual independent, or I don't know, independence is the right word, but freedoms to govern within your own kind of subnational or regional government, right? Now, in a federal system, the central government cannot take away those constitutionally protected powers. In a unitary system of government, you have one central government, and they have the ultimate decision-making ability. They cannot take away certain abilities from regional governments. That is the difference, the fundamental difference between a federal and unitary system. Now, if we're going to look at the next idea, if I can do that, I can. We're going to look at the concept of devolution, which is an awesome word, and autonomous regions. So when you devolve power, or the act of devolution, that means this only exists within a unitary government, by the way. Devolution is when the central government starts to devolve, or it starts to give power out to regional governments. So if you have a very centralized system of government and the federal government or the central government makes all decisions, once you allow the regional governments to start to make decisions, then you are devolving power. We're going to look at a big case of this happening is in the United Kingdom, where, if you can see my cursor here, this is where London is. And this is where the central government is, but then you have all these other regional governments, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. And England, or the United Kingdom, decided to devolve power and start to give more independence to these regional governments. Now, the difference between devolution and autonomous regions is actually, it depends on really how democratic the country is that is doing it. So in Russia, although it is a federal system, they in China, which is unitary, they decided that they have large areas of the country that the majority of the population are actually ethnic minorities. Okay, so what they do is they allow these groups of people to have relative autonomy, and that means kind of relative independence, as a couple things, as kind of like an olive branch to give them, a peace offering, but also, in practical matters, it means that the central government gives them less funding, right, and less support in certain areas. So if you were to travel to these kind of autonomous regions in the countries of China and Russia, you would notice a significant difference in the standard of living and all of these other metrics, GDP per capita, as it's related to the rest of the country. Okay. And then when a country centralizes power, it is when you actually start to retract regional power to the central government rather than expand. So it's really the opposite of devolution. So typically, This happens, devolution happens in a more democratic system. So it has happened in the United Kingdom, giving more power to regional governments. And then centralization is a much more authoritarian approach because it's really just taking power away from people and putting it in one central group. This has happened more in countries like China and Russia. So, all right. Types of legislatures. So there are two types that we're concerned about. Or I guess there's really more than two, but that we're concerned about. Unicameral, that is when one single body of the legislature makes laws. So the people that make the laws are in one political institution. Okay. Bicameral is when it's split into two political institutions. Now, there's one question I want you to consider, and I'm not going to give away the answer here, but I want you to consider, and we'll talk about it next class, is why are you more likely to see a bicameral legislature in a federal system of government when you have state governments and regional government? Why is that more likely to be the case? In fact, I can't think of a federal country that does not have a bicameral legislature. Why is that? Okay, so consider that. All right, and then we have presidential versus parliamentary systems. This really just comes down to how the executive is chosen. That is the most fundamental difference. So in a parliamentary system of government, the executive is chosen by the legislature. So if you see here, the voters choose the legislature, and then the legislature chooses the executive, who is usually the prime minister. And then that person is actually elected as a member of the legislature. They're not elected separately. So in the United Kingdom, when you vote, when you sit down and vote, I just got my ballot a couple of days ago, there is no box for voting for prime minister. You vote for a member of the legislature or a member of parliament, and then whatever party gets the majority in parliament gets to choose the executive or the prime minister. Okay. Now there's certain kind of rules within the legislative, the parliamentary system that allows this kind of system of checks and balances. So once you become the prime minister, you do have certain powers that are exclusive to an executive that the rest of the members of parliament don't. But fundamentally, you are still a member of parliament because you are elected as a member of parliament. Okay. Now the difference in a presidential system is voters elect separately for the legislature and the executive, separate elections. Supranational government. Okay, this is the idea that there are groups in the world that have member states. Now we'll get back to that term states, and this means countries that come together and make a larger government, right? Now, the idea of the European Union is probably the best example of it. I think there's 28 countries that come together, maybe 27 without the United Kingdom. I got my numbers straight there. Should I count? No. So, and what happens is those countries agree, they actually have their own parliament, they have their own lawmaking system, and they make laws that affect every member state. And so the biggest criticism of people that are in the European Union, and also to a lesser extent these other groups, World Bank, United Nations, World Trade Organization, is it takes away their sovereignty. Now the word sovereignty is, the root word is to reign, okay? And that means, I think I spelled it wrong. That means their independence, their ability to make their own laws over their own country. So like the United Kingdom, we're going to talk about a little bit more, left the European Union as a result of Brexit, which was a vote that the British citizens made to actually leave the European Union. And the biggest reason was they didn't feel like they had complete sovereignty, autonomy, authority over its own lawmaking process. It had other countries that were making laws that affected their country, right? And so we're going to look at kind of the pros and the cons of the European Union later this year. But that is typically kind of fundamentally the difference between of what sovereignty is in relationship to supranational governance. Is you're forfeiting your ability to govern yourself for the kind of collective, for the benefits that you believe this supranational government would give you. Okay, that is a quick version of all of these things. I've got some questions that I want you to consider on Canvas and answer those for next class. All right. See you then. Bye now.